In Maya 2022, we've got a new option in our bind skin where instead of using a skin cluster, we can use a proximity wrap, which basically allows us to still have a skeleton, and we can use that to drive our mesh, but we're using the proximity wrap instead of a normal skin cluster. Now, this allows for a couple of different things. So, for instance, if I just go in and I do a normal skin cluster here, what I've got is I've got a couple of different kind of input geos here, so that we've got the kind of current skin that we're on. We've got one where I've gone and extruded a couple of pieces, and then you got this third one where I've completely gone rid of the legs here. So what I want is I actually want to go in and add these in so that I can switch between them using this kind of enum here. So if I just go in here and if I find the org shape for this body, I'm just going to add that in here. I'm going to select these. I'm going to press down on my keyboard to get the shapes, and I will get a choice node, and then I'm going to be using that to switch between these. So I get the world mesh of the type A. That will be my input, my first input here, and I'll get this. That will be the second, and then the third will be my type C. So as I can connect this output into my in mesh, and if I just get this body here, I'll add this in. I'll do the body and I'll connect that into the selector. So now you can see that, you know, ignoring the poor first time skinning here, everything is pretty much working as we expect for a skin cluster. But if we now go in and I go type B, we can see that this completely breaks. We've got vertices that go down to the origin, basically because Maya doesn't have any kind of skin cluster info for them. So it doesn't really, it basically gives them a weight of 0, pushing it down to the origin. You can see it's basically around these kind of extrusions that we have on the second mesh. If I go and I do type C, then that just completely messes up the vert order here as well. We now don't have, we've got a completely different kind of order here because I've extruded and changed around a lot of things here. So this is now kind of completely broken here. Kind of cool, but completely broken. But if I go back to my original one, that still works fine because Maya still has those weights. So that's the whole issue here, is that Maya with the skin cluster has defined a per vertex weighting that we are now limited to, so we can't easily change the geometry. We would have to kind of copy weights over in world space or something. Now let's go back and let's just delete that. Whoop. I'm going to just skin, unbind, and I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use the proximity wrap instead now. So doing that, we now have the kind of the same thing here. We have this kind of going, but we can go in and we can go to the proximity wrap. We can change the kind of input of drivers here. We can smooth the influences a bit just to kind of make it a bit nicer. Of course, it kind of helps up here, but all of this is kind of broken as well still. Now, one of the things here now is that we don't really have any input over this proximity wrap system. So it's a bit tricky for us to actually go in and paint these weights. We can't go right click and then go paint skin cluster here as we could with like the other one to go in and kind of fix these issues that we're getting here. But actually the proximity wrap inputs, it will accept if I go and add it in here. Oh, sorry, I didn't select it. If you look at the kind of proximity wrap here, you will see that there's basically, we've got some driver weight functions here. And that's basically where we can go in and we can go in and modify the weighting for each of these kind of drivers here. So what I'm going to do first is, I believe we still have this working. So this is half kind of broken now. So let's just go in and get these kind of primitive falloffs that I've already added here. So if we look at the kind of order that we have here, we basically have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what I can do is if I take this here and I just do graph it, we can see here. Oh, sorry, if I go in, we can see that if I graph this now, we've got all of our joints going into the drivers, and I've got this component falloff and transfer falloff going into the driver weight function. So this is basically taking a bit of like per component weighting, transferring it and doing all of these things, but it's still doing it in almost like an old school my way. And actually we can just get rid of these completely. And we can go in and just kind of override this completely ourselves. So what we can do here is that we can start painting these weights here ourselves. So what I want to do is for the first one, I want to do a uniform falloff. So I basically just want to say, I just want to have the first one cover everything. So if I do that now, and if I go back, we should now see that we have, oh, sorry, that kind of jumped back there. If I set this to be 1, we can now, this is now impacting the whole geometry here. So the uniform falloff doesn't have like a visual thing, it's just 1, or like the value that you set, but it's for the whole space, the whole kind of scene. So it just adds whatever value that you add in here to everything. So that's really what we want to do here. And then if I go in now and I'll do the kind of clavicle weighting here, I'll add that into the second one. And now we should see that we have this impacting our kind of clavicle here. Now we're getting a bit of an offset, but we'll look at that in a bit. First off, let's just kind of add up everything here first. So next up, sorry, I wasn't showing the actual falloffs that I have. So you can see here that I've got a clavicle falloff, which is basically just a sphere that I'm doing in this kind of area. And I've got an arm, which is just a plane that I'm using just to kind of cut through here. And then we've got a forearm, which is basically just kind of covering the from the elbow down. So what we can do then is we'll do the arm, we'll put that in here. You can see that kind of kicked in immediately. So we can now move that around, and that's actually like moving around that area of that we're kind of impacting here as well. And let's do the forearm here as well. You can see that's kind of moving around here as well now. Cool. And we had the last one here as well. So I'll just add that in just so that we kind of have this here. So we still have a bit of like issues going on here now with, you know, we've assigned these kind of placements to where everything is going, but it still doesn't look right. And what's really happening here now is that all of these are being kind of applied together, right? You can see if I just set this kind of on the proximity wrap, if I set the max drivers to 1, you can see we're actually going to just have this one, the kind of base driver, do everything. If I do 2 up here, then we're just starting to kind of add in a bit more and a bit more. And now we're just kind of starting to add in everything here. Now, what's really happening here is that these aren't kind of acting as your normal skin cluster, as in like, oh, I've painted in this area, that means it's overriding this other. No, they're all kind of working together at this point here now. Yeah, I've kind of had that kind of cranked up. So really what we have to start doing is that we have to start thinking about limiting the weights where we want them. So we have to start kind of cutting out the different places where we want these to impact. So really, for example, this kind of uniform falloff that we have here, this is now currently impacting the whole body, but we don't really want it to. We don't want it to impact the kind of clavicle, the arm, and the forearm here. So what we can do to kind of fix this, and 100%, I'm not sure if this is the right way, this is just one way that I found, is that we can use the node called blend falloff to combine or subtract the different things here. So what we can do is we can take the, if I go here, just move these out of the way a bit. So we can take this starting kind of weight that we have, we can add that in here, and I'll just say no operation as we just want to pass this in as it is. Then what we can say is we can take the clavicle, we can take that into the kind of second target here, we can add in the arm as well, and what we can do is we can basically tell those to subtract. And if we now go and we add this in to here, you can now see that we have this fully impacting that area. Because what we've done now is that we basically said this uniform falloff should only work in this kind of area here, so that we don't really have this impacting all of the things here. Sorry. So now, when I'm just going to do this a bit bigger. You can see that now when we're moving around the clavicle, we're getting full influence on that. And when we're now moving around the arm, we're getting full influence on that as well. You can see it's perfectly following the arm here. And the really cool thing about this as well now is that because this is still connected perfectly live here, we can still move around these kind of objects. So you can see I can actually go in and change this kind of offset that we had here. Now, we still have some issues kind of happening here where this isn't following. So let's just go in and double check that. You can see we actually forgot to add in the forearm here. So if I now go and I take the forearm and I add that in here, that does a funky thing because it defaults to multiply when it's added in. So really what I want here is subtract again. And it's still giving us a funky thing. So what's happening? What gives? Why is it still awkward? Well, that's basically because I've added in the kind of primitive. I'm going to take this back to the to the kind of default position. It was kind of freaking me out here a bit. So what we can see here is because how I've added in the skinning for the arm, I've used a plane. And if we look here, you can basically see that at the beginning here, I've got 0 on this side and I got 1 on this side. And that basically means that everything on this side will be on 1. So what we have to do here is we have to do the same principle, but for the arm. So we have to remove the influence that the arm has on the forearm. So I'll go and I'll do another blend falloff. And I'll basically go and I will just show all attributes. I'll go and I will add in the arm. And I will add in the forearm. And what I want to do is I'll do no operation on the arm, and then I'll do subtract on the forearm. And then I'll just have to make sure that I add this in where the arm should be going. So I'm going to just add this up a bit. So that's basically on number 2 there, or on index 2 rather. And if I add that in, now everything should be working, shouldn't it? And huzzah! Look at that. Glorious. So that's weird. Now the arm is impacting the whole body again. So what's happening here now? Another kind of issues. Well, so this is one thing to be really, really careful about. By default, most of these kind of blend falloff nodes, the component falloff nodes, they will have a base weight. And that base weight will usually be 0. Sorry, it will usually be 1. So actually what we're doing here now is that and on this side where we actually took off the kind of 0, we've now added back in 1. So if we go and we change this to 0, you can now see that we're back in here. But we keep getting kind of issues here. So now this is working, but this isn't kind of working here now. Let's see if I move this around. So what's really happening here now? It's just like a lot of little kind of small things that kind of add up here now. So what's wrong? Well, let's see. So we basically have our kind of arm. We take that in, and then we do our this. So this seems to kind of work as intended, but there's something funky happening with this arm. So there's a small part here where it's actually working. And, you know, let's see what's really happening here. So is it any of these? And, oh, so here you can see now. So this is, again, one of the like little small things to watch out for is the fact that because I now changed the base weight to 0, the kind of original part of this was 0, and because I was now passing through this arm with no operation, it wasn't really changing anything to this layer. At least this is how I understand it. Again, I might be completely wrong, but we have to make sure that we add in the falloff of the arm, and then we can subtract the forearm. So there's a couple of these things that you have to go through to kind of build up this whole system. But as soon as you have this, then everything will pretty much be there and working. And let's see here now. If I can... Oh, I don't think I set that up correctly. So let me just double check here. If we have everything kind of going here. Yes. So this was one thing that I kind of forgot here as well, is that when you have a setup like this, when you're changing topology and when you're going through, you have to make sure that you kind of tell the proximity wrap here as well. So you can see in this setup here now, we have the body shape order going in as like an input and kind of working here. But the original geometry is actually coming from this type A shape. And we don't really want that. We want it to come from our kind of body shape org or just directly from the choice node. But I'm just going to do this and put it in here. And if we go back now, I should now be able to, boom, jump between all of these kind of different ones that I have here. And you can see the deformation is still exactly the same. I can move this around. It's doing all of the kind of deformation that I wanted. Of course, I might want to kind of fix that deformation up here a bit, but I can still do pretty much all the deformation, and I can switch between these different body types. Something that was just impossible using the old system without having to do something more kind of stuff in here. And as I mentioned as well, right, if we look and we find something that we don't like here with the kind of shaping here, we can go in and we can fix that. So because these are still live, you know, I could look at, okay, this kind of part here, I'm not too fond of that. Let me, actually, I can do this in a bit, so I get a bit more of like the belt shape here. And probably want to do negative Y. So you can see I can go and like start scaling that down a bit here. And is that negative Z? You know, something like that, just to try and start controlling that shape there a bit more, or potentially just rotate it. You know, I'm still very new to the system, but this is basically what you could do to go through and set up controlling the proximity wrap with all of these kind of input things here as well. So I hope this was kind of useful and that kind of showed you some of like the pitfalls that can happen when you start messing about with these different nodes and how you need to think to kind of layer all of these things together.